The storyteller welcomes you to another nightmare. Plug in your earphones, close your eyes, and let us begin.
It's 3 a.m. The air is thick, and the station is eerily silent. There's a tension in the air that I can't explain, like something is wrong, but I just can't put my finger on it. The flickering lights above me cast long, twisted shadows on the platform, making it feel like something or someone is lurking in the darkness, waiting. I should have left, but I didn't. I'm a train operator. I've worked countless night shifts before, but this one was different. Something happened that night, something I can't explain, and to this day, it still haunts me. It started with a phone call. The station was supposed to be quiet. My shift was over. I was ready to clock out and go home. But then the phone rang. "Hello?" I said, picking up the receiver, the cold metal of the handset pressing against my ear. "We got an issue. There's an abandoned train on track 9. Get out there and check it out," the dispatcher said, voice crackling through the line. I froze for a moment. Abandoned train? At this time of night? I looked at the clock. It was already well past midnight, and the only trains that should have been running were the late-night services, which had long finished their routes. But I didn't ask any questions. I grabbed my flashlight, locked the break room, and walked down the dark hallway toward track 9. My footsteps echoed in the silence, growing louder with each step. There was no one else around. The train station was deserted. At least, I thought it was. When I got to track 9, I saw it. A train. But it was strange. The lights inside were on and the train was running, engine humming like it was ready to leave. Yet, the train wasn't moving. It was sitting there, abandoned, as though someone had just walked away and left it there in the dead of night. I stepped closer, my heart beginning to race. What the hell? There was no one on board. No crew. No passengers. Just emptiness. I boarded the train, thinking maybe I could find someone nearby. But the second my foot crossed the threshold, I felt it. A chill. Not the kind you get from cold air, but the kind that runs deep through your bones. It was like something wasn't right. I moved through the carriages, calling out, "Hello? Is anyone here?" My voice echoed back to me, but there was no reply. The silence felt suffocating, unnatural. Then, as I passed through the third carriage, the doors behind me slammed shut with a deafening clang. I spun around. The doors, they were locked. There was no one around to have done it. Panic set in. Before I could even think, the train jerked forward. Slowly at first, then faster. And I realized something. The train was moving. But why? I hadn't even touched the controls. The train had no reason to start. I ran to the control cabin. I tried everything. The brake, the emergency stop. Nothing worked. The train didn't respond. It just kept moving. I checked the timetable. It was dead silent on the radio. No one was expecting this train. No one was expecting me. I should have felt more scared than I did. But my mind was racing, trying to make sense of it all. I tried calling dispatch, but there was no signal. I was completely alone, trapped on this train that I couldn't stop. The hours seemed to stretch on. The train passed through station after station, but no one was getting on. No one was getting off. It was just me and the empty seats. I checked the clock. I couldn't believe it. Hours had passed. The train had been moving for so long. I was stuck in a never-ending loop. We passed stations where passengers should have been waiting, but they were empty. Entire platforms deserted. It was as though the world around me had vanished. And then I heard something. I wasn't alone. It started as a faint whisper coming from the back of the train. Help! I turned around, heart pounding in my chest, but there was no one there. I didn't know if I had imagined it or if my mind was starting to crack under pressure. But then it happened again. The whisper, louder this time. Help! Stop the train. I started running down the length of the train, my legs weak, my pulse pounding in my ears. Every car I checked, empty, not a soul, just me. I finally made my way to the control room again, desperate. I tried every switch, every lever, every button, but nothing worked. The train wouldn't stop. The whistle blew again, this time louder and longer, like a warning. It was then that I saw it. The flickering lights in the control room, and in the reflection of the window, something behind me, something standing. I didn't turn around. I couldn't. I just couldn't. I kept my eyes glued to the control panel, praying it would end. And then, just as suddenly as it started, the train screeched to a halt. The doors opened. I stepped out, and the silence was deafening. When I reached the station, I went straight to my supervisor, but they just looked at me like I was crazy. They told me no train had been scheduled to run that night. In fact, no train was even supposed to be on track 9. The whole thing had been impossible. And that's when they told me about the ghost train. It wasn't the first time someone had disappeared on the tracks. I'm not the first operator who's seen it, and I won't be the last. The train never stops. No passengers, no explanation, just endless, empty tracks and the sound of someone whispering for help in the dark. I don't know what happened that night, but every time I think back to that train, I hear that whisper, and I know it's waiting for someone else. And the next time, it could be you. Be careful. Not all trains stop at their final station. Before we move on to the next story, if you like true scary stories, please subscribe to Storyteller and click the bell icon for more creepy tales every week. It was 3 a.m., the usual time for him. Every night, without fail, he walked into the diner. I'd been working the late shift at this greasy, run-down 24-hour diner for months, and I knew his routine by heart. Coffee, black, always, and he'd sit in the same booth by the window, just staring out into the night. But what happened that night changed everything. I just finished wiping down the counter when I saw him walk through the door, but something wasn't right. He was early, too early, and his eyes were wide, frantic, like he'd just seen a ghost or was running from one. His name was Mr. Green. He was an older man, always wearing a worn-out brown jacket, his hands shaking slightly as he walked. I never knew much about him, but I didn't need to. He was a regular, a lonely guy, always coming in around 3 a.m. for his coffee, and that was it. Never a word more than necessary. But tonight was different. Something about him made my stomach twist with unease. Your usual? I asked, try to sound casual, but my voice was thick with the tension I felt in the air. He nodded, but instead of the usual blank stare, he looked at me, really looked at me, like he was trying to see right through me. I set the coffee mug down in front of him, and as he took his first sip, his hand trembled. His eyes darted around the diner like he was waiting for something to jump out at him. He muttered under his breath, his voice hoarse, "They're coming for me. I can feel it, they're coming." I didn't know how to respond. I stood there, frozen. Who is he talking about? Who's coming, Mr. Green? I asked, my voice shaking more than I wanted to admit, but he didn't answer. He didn't even look at me. Instead, he slammed his coffee cup down on the table, his eyes wide and frantic. The sound of the ceramic hitting the table echoed in the otherwise quiet diner. I can't stay. I can't stay here, he whispered, as if trying to convince himself. He stood up abruptly, knocking his chair back with a loud scrape that sent a chill down my spine. Before I could ask him anything else, he was gone. Gone in an instant, like he was running from something or someone. I watched him through the window as he hurried across the street. His steps were fast, like he was running for his life. I tried to shake off the unease, telling myself it was nothing. People have their moments, right? Maybe he was just confused, maybe he had too much to drink. But deep down, something didn't sit right with me. Then something happened that made my heart stop. I saw him again. I watched through the window as he crossed back over to the other side of the street, walking in the opposite direction. But this time, something was wrong. He didn't look the same. His clothes were the same, but they looked older, ragged, like they hadn't been washed in years. His posture was different, like he had aged 10, maybe 20 years in a matter of minutes. And his face was gaunt, almost skeletal, as though the life had been drained out of him. I felt my stomach drop. My head swam. The man I had just seen leave was now different. I couldn't move. I couldn't breathe. I just watched as he stumbled down the street, his gait unsteady, like he was being dragged somewhere against his will. I felt like I was losing my mind, but before I could do anything, he disappeared around the corner. I couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right, so I did what anyone would do. I checked the diner security footage. Maybe there was an explanation. Maybe I had missed something. But what I found, well, it made my blood run cold. The footage showed the same man I had just seen walk up to the diner. But the moment he reached the door, he vanished, just like that. The man I had watched walk into the diner, sit down, drink his coffee, was nowhere to be seen on the security footage. I rewound it, played it back. Still nothing. It was like he had never even been there. My heart was pounding in my chest. I couldn't breathe. I stared at the screen, trying to process what I was seeing. The figure that had walked toward the diner was there, sure, but then, poof, he was gone. Not a single trace. I played it over and over again, but there was no doubt in my mind this was impossible. I knew what I had seen. I had seen Mr. Green. I had seen him walk in, drink his coffee, panic, and leave. But according to the footage, he never entered the diner at all. I didn't know what to make of it. I couldn't sleep, couldn't think straight. So I called a coworker. Maybe she'd seen something I didn't. Maybe I was just losing my mind from the late hours. But when I told her what happened, she didn't say a word. She told me to hang up the phone and get out of the diner. And then she said the words that made my blood run cold. That diner has always been haunted. It's been years since anyone saw Mr. Green in person. He died here years ago. I don't know how to explain it. I don't know what happened that night, but I can tell you one thing for sure. Mr. Green never left. That diner, that place is cursed. I don't know who or what was walking around that night, but the real Mr. Green, the one I had seen every night for months, is gone. And now, every time I close my eyes, I see him, standing in that same booth, staring out the window. And every time someone walks into the diner late at night, I can't help but wonder if it's really them, or if it's someone or something else entirely. I'll never forget what happened. And neither should you, because sometimes the people you think you know never really leave. Be careful who you sit next to in a diner at 3 a.m. Some people just don't leave.